So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second session of the day here in the Extreme Hangout. My name is Millie Hodgkinson. I'm Global Partnerships Manager for One Young World, the Global Forum for Young Leaders. And I just want to extend a big welcome to everyone joining us here in the ferry in Glasgow, and also the digital attendees that are joining in around the world as well. So just a quick housekeeping. So wherever you're joining from, basically we are going to have a Slido sort of session, so you can participate by sending in your question and answers. We should have a link, here we go, so www.sli.do, and then that's the unique code, so just log in through that. Any questions that you have throughout the session, please do send them in digitally as well. So without further ado, this session will be based on the global water gap, so broadening safe water and sanitation access through finance. And we've got three great panelists today. Firstly, we've got Gary White, the CEO and co-founder of Water.org and Water Equity. We also have Jennifer Kolpas, the co-founder and executive director of Tierra Grata, and Fahim Ahmed, the medical doctor and ESG investment analyst for Federated Hermes. So we also have a very short video message from a special guest who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. And we'll play that now, and we hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, Matt Damon here, co-founder of Water.org and Water Equity. Nearly 1 billion people lack access to safe water. Double that number don't have a toilet. We can't solve global challenges without solving the water and sanitation crisis. Water is the best investment the world can make to fight climate change, empower women, improve health, and end poverty. Water has the power to turn poverty into possibilities, and you do too. You, the next generation of passionate young leaders and One Young World ambassadors, can lead the charge for universal access to water and sanitation. This world is more interconnected today than ever before. We have to work together on these global challenges to create a brighter, more just future. Let's work together to ensure healthy people and a healthy planet. And now, my friend and Water.org and Water Equity co-founder, Gary White, will tell you more about the global water crisis, how it connects to climate, and what you can do to help. Thank you.
I'd say thank you, Matt, as if he's here, but thank you, Matt, for the introduction. Well, it is great to be here, part of this One Young World event and COP26. And it's great, actually, to be talking in front of live people. It's been 2 years of lots of flat screens, so this is like my inaugural speech to people in real life. So thanks for being here and being a part of everything that we're doing. I think just jumping right into the talk. And can I go back a slide? There we go. Okay. So think about when you woke up this morning. So everybody here, found water somewhere. It was probably just a few steps away from where you woke up, and you just took that for granted and didn't give it a second thought. But I think looking at these statistics, it's pretty clear that that's not the case for most people, for many of the people living in the world. 1 in 9 lack access to water. 2 billion people don't have access to a proper toilet. And every 2 minutes, a child dies from a water-related disease. 200 million hours will be spent today by women walking to collect water. Another 266 million hours will be spent by women looking for a place just to relieve themselves. So imagine, if you woke up this morning and your water situation was that you had to walk a couple of hours to a water hole to find water. What if, overnight that water hole had finally dried up, maybe because of climate change, maybe because of overuse, and you had to walk another hour to find the water? What if you're living in an urban slum and there is no water source to go collect water, and you have to pay a water vendor sometimes 25% of your income because you don't have enough savings, enough money to pay to connect to the water grid. And that's really the reality that we're facing with water and sanitation right now for literally billions of people around the world. There we go. Now compound that, right? 2 years ago, COVID hit. What was the first thing that we were all told to do? Wash your hands. Wash them vigorously with soap and water. Stay home, right? If you don't have access to safe water, obviously you're not going to be washing your hands. If you need to walk to get your water, you're not going to be able to stay home. You have to go and queue for water. So this just compounded the global water crisis. And as we also know, if it's not enough that this is impacting people around the world, we know that COVID doesn't stay in one country. So as long as one of us is not safe from COVID anywhere in the world, none of us are really safe, especially as we look at the mutations. So this affects us in all kinds of ways, not just from the humanitarian perspective. It's just wrong that people should have to live this way, but it also comes back and can affect us directly. So how do we solve for this, right? What do we do at water.org and Water Equity to take this problem on? So, we ask, what if instead of this whole problem needing to be solved by charity, we could innovate and create new ways of thinking about how to get people access to safe water? And that's where we came across the concept, or invented the concept of water credit. And what we believe is that if we can solve this in a smarter way by looking at not just charity from the top down, but also the empowering of people with the right financial tools from the bottom up. What if one of these poor women could get access to a small loan so she could connect to that water grid, and she would no longer have to spend time walking for water or waiting in a queue for water? And so we recognized that this has to be a bottom-up solution as well as a top-down. And we knew that people living in poverty greatly valued water access and that they were willing to pay for it. Because like I said before, sometimes they're spending up to 25% of the little income that they have to secure water because they can't get the long-term solutions that they need. So we saw this as all hands on deck. How do we work with people living in poverty as well as philanthropists and investors from the top down? And so by doing this, we felt like, what if we could solve for the system? What if, for the first time, we could connect even the global capital markets with people making under $6 a day so they could solve their own water and sanitation crisis, so they could get a toilet built at their home, so that they could purchase a rainwater system, a water tank, a water connection. So looking at this from a perspective of how do we not just drill one more well, but how do we help solve for the system? Water credit was that idea, and now it's really taken off. If you look at the number of people that we've reached through this model by giving women access to small affordable loans, 31 million people have been reached with that. More than 6.8 million of these microloans have been dispersed around the world. And it's leveraged, this slide is actually not even up to date today, it's leveraged about $3 billion now in microloan capital from the capital markets, most of that from the capital markets within the countries where people living in poverty and where these problems exist. So that's really where we've gotten to. If you look at the statistics on this, 87% of the people benefiting from water credit are women, mostly in rural areas, which is, I think, striking for many people because of the poverty level there. 88% live on less than $6 a day. And here's the really interesting part. Women living in poverty are actually a really great credit risk. They repay these loans at 99% because they recognize that if they can do that, it's kind of a pay-it-forward system as well. The next person can get access to water and sanitation. So just to bring this into like a real story of someone that I met to describe a little bit how this works, because as you can imagine, we're not like a traditional water NGO where we go and drill wells and kind of cut ribbons and then go ask for another donation from donors. We are trying to solve this in a more complex way, but at the end of the day, it makes sense because of the value creation. So the woman that I met before COVID a few years ago in the Philippines, she was paying one of these water vendors $5 a day for her water supply, right? So she was, she was paying $60 a month. So she was paying more like a small amount each day. So that $60 each month that she was paying to a water vendor was just lost to her. And it wasn't even high quality water. And what she did is she took out one of these micro loans, and now her loan payment was only $5 a month. So she was going from that high level to that much lower level every day. And she was then paying about $5 a month for her water tariff. So she was paying $10 total instead of $60 at this point. Because she was able to capture that value, she was able to then repay that loan. So really, people around the world face this concept of not having access to water and how it causes them to miss time at work, how it takes cash from their pockets, et cetera. And that's why the Water Credit Initiative can really work and take off. And that's why so many people take this kind of demand-driven approach to solve their water problem instead of having to wait around for charity to solve it for them. So what are the key insights of this work that we're doing? One is it's really expensive to be poor, right? If you have to pay $60 a month for your water just because you can't afford like a $300 loan to pay for a water connection, that's really expensive, right, to be poor. That's the key insight here, that people have the ability and willingness to pay for services. It's just a matter of helping them get that done. Also, the poor people are not equally poor. We know that there are people who are living in such extreme poverty that this model won't work, right? But it will work for literally hundreds of millions of people who can take advantage of something like water credit. And if we look at the problem for those hundreds of millions and freeing up more of the subsidy that they don't need, that subsidy can be then redirected to some of the poorest people who need that subsidy to secure water and sanitation. And we also came at this from a pragmatic point of view. If you look at the amount of philanthropy going into solving this crisis, and even the investment capital going into this, it's a small, small sliver of what it would take, the $1 trillion it would take to solve this problem. So we see this as kind of lighting a candle instead of cursing the darkness, instead of saying, well, just more philanthropy, more money from the top down. Let's also look at it from the bottom up, and knowing that we can then mobilize those capital markets. And I think the key to this also is knowing this isn't like an outside solution. We're not coming in and like doing all the work ourselves. What we're doing is looking for those local partners, those financial partners who we can work with so that they can get these loan portfolios scaled up even further. So it's the partnership of the people themselves who are coming into it, the partnership of local financial institutions, and then just kind of a little bit of a nudge from us into these capital markets to make it all work. So we don't need to spend much time on this one. This is just basically showing, when you look at this problem from a different perspective, how you can kind of scale up and how this has really taken off with the impact. So more than half of our total impact, 15 million people, was achieved just in the last 3 years. And we've been at this for a few decades. So the scaling of water credit has made a huge difference. And then we're here because of the climate, right? So let me just bring this into the climate context a little bit. So we know that water is climate. We know that if you look at how climate is cutting across society and people, it's in the form of water. Too much water in a lot of places, and not enough water in others, and how that changes and evolves. We also know it's going to impact the least among us the most, and that's what we see with people that we are now working with who have, maybe for the first time, gotten tenuous access to water. And with climate change coming and drought and floods, that is potentially going to cause us to backslide and have those people lose access to water. So not only do there's the 750 million who still lack access right now, but those who have gotten it are in peril as climate change comes in. And this is why we need to talk about this problem of climate, yes, in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation for some of the poorest people in the world so that we can help them secure their water resources into the future. So that's the challenge that we see in water conservation as well as water access for people living in poverty, and that's where we're most concerned. So just looking at this from the climate perspective and what's happening, the investment in infrastructure is really, really low. If you look at all of the climate investment that's happening right now, and you look at the amount of the investment that's going to access to water and sanitation, it's less than 0.3% of all of the climate investment is going into helping people living in poverty secure access to these resources. And we see that the resources themselves are like leaking carbon. It says they're leaking water, but they're really leaking carbon. And by that I mean, if you are losing 8 trillion gallons of water that's unaccounted for in these water systems around the world, what that is, that's a huge carbon footprint that goes along with that. Pumping water, moving it from where it is to where it needs to be, treating it, distributing it, it has a massive carbon footprint. And that is carbon that's completely wasted. If you're using carbon, emitting carbon to drive to your job so that you can make money and support your family, that makes some sense. But if you're using carbon in a way that's completely wasted, 25% of all the water, that makes no sense. It adds no economic value. So we've got to invest in that infrastructure, and we've got to translate that into both people getting water, but also carbon mitigation, also carbon credits. And so that's what we're looking to do as well, is to look at how we invest in that infrastructure. And I think that was the end, because this is another presentation that I'm going to do some other time. So we'll just back up here. So I think, the thing to remember here is that water is an incredible investment, that we can use philanthropic capital in a way to leverage the capital markets. It's the best way to empower women. It's the best way to fight climate change. It's the best way to improve health, and I believe the best way to end poverty. So with that, we'll go back into the panel.
All right, so I'd love to open up the stage for some questions now. I guess we can start with you, Gary. 1 in 10 people do not have access to clean water, as we've heard. What are the main barriers to equal access to safe water? Do you delve a bit deeper?
Yeah, I would say the proximate barriers really are, by and large, access to finance. If we see the potential for hundreds of millions of people to solve their own, they know what they need. They know there's a utility. Sometimes these pipes are running right under their feet in some of these neighborhoods, but they can't afford to connect with them. And so getting them access to these financial tools so that they can then join the network and become actually paying customers, that actually helps sustain the utility as well. Now, long term, I think it's why we're all here in this city now, it is the fact that what's going to be the greatest barrier to access is just going to be water resources not where they need to be. And what we're going to see, we know that we're talking about climate refugees as well, and how that's going to tax all of our societies. But when you think about it, climate refugees are water refugees. That's why they're moving, right? It's not necessarily the heat itself being hotter. It's like their water resources gone. So like I say, you wake up in the morning and you don't have water, you're going to go as far as you need to find it. And that is what's going to lead into this climate, being really a water migration.
No, absolutely. It is such a massive kind of cycle of poverty here. And I guess, Jennifer, maybe you could help us understand better how like greater access to clean water can help potentially break this cycle of poverty.
Yeah, for sure. Like just to add on the financial thing, like other ways that why is water not like very expand like access to water that should be is because like traditional ways of give access to water and sanitation are like centralized. So we need to also move to centralized solution, very adapted to these rural remote communities. So we are not talking about they need the tools for financial to get the solution, but again we need to like keep creating new like innovative solutions in the context of the rural areas where is the most of the people that doesn't have access to water. So in the case of Colombia, for example, we are talking about a community that you have like to drive at least like 4 hours, then like to walk 2 hours, maybe to cross the river. So there is no way to establish there like aqueduct or a sewer system. So you also need to adapt new solutions, like innovative solutions for this context. And together with that, give the people the financial solutions. So I guess, of course, there will be like an integral solution for that. And of course, like water is like when you say like the global index of multidimensional poverty, then you say like access to water is one of them. And then if you don't have access to water, then you have like a lot of illness, then you have to walk, then like your well-being is reduced, your productivity is being reduced. So you start like struggling with a lot of things that is not just like drink water. I mean, we cannot like reduce the problem of I don't have water to drink, but it's like the whole problem for just people like living on life, like under life poverty.
Yeah, there's so many different effects from it, as you've touched upon just there. But Fahim, I don't know if you could touch a bit more on kind of the main consequences of global health with the global water gap.
Sure. Before I do that, first I'd like to thank One Young World for really focusing on water as a priority at such a timely and pertinent conference where it really is one of the defining public policy challenges of our lifetime. And, Gary, when we last met in Davos, speaking to Matt as well, I did ask him if he'd be the main character in my film, if it ever was to be one. And in his true fashion and the irony of water, I slipped on a stream but on the Peak District. But, to come back to health and the implications of water and sanitation, my parents are from Bangladesh, and I spent the last decade as a social entrepreneur and working on a social incubator and pioneering health tech interventions in this part of the developing world. And it's that inability to access safe hygiene practices from safe birthing, not having access in these maternal health facilities and all the issues that come with that, to not having access to safe drinking water and typhoid, cholera, and all these waterborne diseases that are born through these pandemics and all these vector spreads. And when we look at health in the context of water as well, it's important that we understand what the root causes of these issues with global health and how we can address this through financing. And it's something that in my current role as an ESG investor is what we try and structure our financing, our direct equity solutions with Federated Hermes. So you have close to $1 trillion of assets under management and more than $1 trillion under advice. And what we try and do is galvanize different asset owners and asset managers to focus on addressing some of these social impact issues, such as water and hygiene and sanitation. So without the right financing, without the right incentives and aligning them, it's very difficult to see tangible outcomes.
I guess we talk about how we have finance to help these global solutions. How can microfinance actually contribute to reducing the global water gap? Can you go into a bit more detail about that?
Sure. Microfinance, of course, with Bangladesh was one of the pioneers there. Mohammed Yusuf, actually a good family friend, and what he was able to achieve in Bangladesh has been a model for credit and microfinance worldwide. And as we say, that bottom of the pyramid is definitely the area that finance needs to be focused on. But also from the top down, in terms of being able to funnel direct equity investments into infrastructure projects. You've got massive issues with even storage of water facilities, how you're going to distribute it, how you're going to access these rural areas. And more than 75% of the financing challenge lies with the infrastructural issues. And that's where much of the finance needs to be focused as well. But when it comes to the individuals as well, and Gary can speak more to this, microfinance is just one of the many ways, or innovative ways, that we can create financial instruments to achieve this equity.
Don't know if there's any more comments. Karen, did you?
Well, yeah, I can also point out how is it like in my case, like in my organization. For example, at the beginning, we were just, as Gary was saying, doing as a charity. So we were giving them the water filters for free. We're giving them our waterless toilets for free. But then we realized that they were not taking care as we were expecting. And so, because they are getting the solution for free. So then we moved to charge for them, and we kind of have this microcredit. They are paying 50% of the total of the solution in small installments. So we have to establish this. When we moved from charity to charge them, to have this credit, it totally changed that the way they approach the solution, the way they maintain, the way they use it. So it's also when you said when it's very different when you say, okay, raise your hand who wants a filter. Everybody wants to say, I want a filter, but it's different. Okay, who wants to pay a filter? Who is willing to pay the solution? Who is asking who wants to really have access to safe water and sanitation through their own effort, through your own power. You give power when you gave the choice to choose if they want to pay their water sanitation solution. So for us, it's having really a new social intervention approach when we move from charity to give the solution for them by installment. So I can guarantee that it's really a really important tool to give them credits together with the solutions.
Yeah, if I could just build on, I think that's amazing, and I think it's also important to recognize that the reason this can work in water and sanitation is because of the value created for people, right? So it's just not okay, just kind of step up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do this. And it's okay, how do we rearrange the financial pieces for this family? And it's not that they can't afford to get these solutions, if they're allowed to pay for them over time. And if they can pay for them over time, they'll take that option because it creates value for their family, for them. It creates value in terms of reduced health cost. It reduces the time that they spend walking that they can then turn into a paying job. It takes away that 25% of their income they may have been paying a water vendor. So what you have to look at is okay, this value creation is happening. How do we then set that into motion in a really big way? You've got to take a slice of that value that's created and hand it to the microfinance institution that's helping them. That microfinance institution may have a loan from Water Equity, our asset manager. You take another little bit of slice of that value and you hand it to us so that we can then provide it to investors so that we can then tap this unlimited pool of capital called the global capital markets. And if that woman can keep 70% of the value herself, she's still far ahead. But what you've done is slice this in a way that you can connect her to the tools that she needs. And so that's why, oftentimes I feel we get a lot of feedback these people are so poor, they can't really take a loan. It's that's wrong. You should just be able to give the water for free. But, it just isn't going to scale that way because even now with some of the billionaires, that are worth hundreds of billions of dollars, it's still darn hard to shake philanthropy loose from these individuals. And philanthropy is a limited resource. And we need to take that philanthropy and apply it in the ways that you're talking about to jumpstart these markets so that we can then scale the solutions to where they need to be. We need to look at tapping into carbon credits to help bring some of that value back to these women as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess, Gary, just going a bit deeper into kind of water.org, like how would you say that water.org really works towards broader access for safe water and sanitation, like in kind of a step-by-step process?
Well, for sure. So we don't do this in a vacuum. What we do is we work with local financial institutions and local government. I mean, we've been really collaborating with the government of India, who have this broad mandate of getting safe sanitation and water to everyone in the country. And through our water credit program there, I think we've reached between 12 and 15 million people just in India alone by helping bring the microfinance sector into water and sanitation. Because before we were doing this water credit program, these MFIs, the microfinance institutions, would not lend for water and toilets because they did not see it as income generating. What they were missing was this value creation and how it could basically stimulate savings at the household level so that they could pay for these loans. So once we were able to nudge those MFIs into the picture, the government of India was like, okay, we've got more paying customers paying into joining the utility, and can we use this model? Because they knew that in their governmental treasury coffers, they didn't have enough money to give water to everyone, but they've then used this as an example across India now to say, okay, look to microfinance as a tool that can help solve the situation there. So I think it is trying to work with governments to solve this issue for everyone while you use the markets as much as you can, and then you use the government subsidies where the market won't work for that lowest percentage of the population. But you don't treat everyone the same and say that everyone is too poor. And we really believe, you know, the poor are not necessarily a problem to be solved, but a market to be served. And if you turn it around like that, you then can find lots of investment and resources to help solve.
And lots of opportunity as well, definitely. And you talk about kind of involving the government of India, like how important would you say, like we have COP26 going on at the moment, all of this kind of multilateralism, and how important is it to get people together from all over the world and collaborate with the governments across the world, and what are the consequences if this just doesn't happen?
Well, just on that point there, well, previously in my role at UBS and other firms in terms of structuring social impact bonds is one way of being able to address this and bringing together public and private sector players. You know, you need those people on the ground, the real drivers of change on the front lines, such as the social enterprises and the charities and foundations that we've spoken about, to actually deliver the change. But you need to be able to provide that upfront working capital that they lack. And that's where the investors can come in if they can structure a type of instrument which measures those tangible outcomes that can be easily achieved. For example, reducing maternal-related deaths associated with hygiene by X%, or waterborne diseases by Y. You're able to set these standards and hold players to account, because you need to have all stakeholders in the whole financial system aligned. And by working with local governments as well and national governments in structuring these kind of bonds, you're also able to get them to have that incentive where they will remunerate the investors on those targets that are met. And you know, there's a number of different examples of how this has worked well. We've got Dalberg in India who've done this with hand washing and the WASH initiative. You've got Bridges Fund who've launched social outcomes partnerships between public and private sector players to address some of these impact issues. And again, on that topic of being able to structure the incentives, being able to have those stakeholders aligned and being able to incentivize them in the right way is key to creating tangible change.
I don't know if...
I can add that, of course, like to expand and to scale the solutions, government needs to take the responsibility of. It is a human right, so it is a government duty, but it's not working as it's supposed to be. So as civil society, we are like developing innovative solutions to drive to the people, but we cannot scale as a national level without the state. So that's why we are like trying to to take them also to the table, to talk with them, like, and to expand the solutions that are already made. For example, in the case of Colombia, decentralized solutions like eco toilets and like different solutions from the traditional 3 years ago was not able, like, for the law to be delivered to rural communities. Now the state say yes, okay, these other solutions that like new entrepreneurships are developing, yes, you can. It's legal to provide to the rural areas. So I guess it's like one step further, like to start expanding, because I think like access to water is something that we need to solve very urgently, and we cannot like with little steps solve the problem. So we need the state on board also to expand it. So yes, of course, it's the perfect way to start tackling the problem.
Yeah. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I absolutely agree with trying to get the government regulatory framework right. And as Water Equity, which is our asset manager that does raise debt and equity capital in the U.S. and Europe and then deploy it around the world, it can be cumbersome, right, to be able to work with local utilities with external investment. I think there's been some really some horror stories of like outside owners coming in, like in Cochabamba, right, in South America. And what we're talking about is something completely different. And I think it's bringing in that finance with covenants as we provide this debt capital, covenants that specify the level of poverty, the income levels that are to be served by the improvements in that infrastructure. So, this is coming from Water.org and Water Equity. We exist because of the response to the human side of this, and we want to bring in the type of investment that does not just serve the middle class in some of these cities, but make sure that investment goes to connect the poorer neighborhoods. And as you can see, we have been able to generate $3 billion in demand from the bottom up. And so the challenge now is people who have these loans and want to connect, and the infrastructure from the top down isn't there. We will then need to start investing in that more and more. And that's the next phase of Water Equity, is to be able to bring these public-private partnerships to bring that catalytic investment capital so that some of the bigger money can flow through the World Bank and other capital providers that aren't quite as, they don't have the alacrity maybe that we do and the ability to kind of make deals happen. But they can then follow on with that if we can be in there kind of de-risking some things and doing this right. And so that's the key, working with the government to get the regulatory framework right, working with the impact investors to develop these funds, and then using Water Equity and Water.org as the mechanism to ensure that investment capital finds those in most need.
Yeah, I think it's just such a complicated process, but then also bringing it down to much simpler terms for us, it's fantastic. But one last question, I know that we don't have too much time left for this, but just bringing it back, I guess, Fahim, maybe you could tell us a bit about kind of how young leaders can get more involved in kind of the combating the global water gap, and exactly what we can do to kind of help out with this.
Sure, well, platforms such as One Young World and the ambassadors that we have here are doing amazing things with their own social enterprises and their charities and initiatives are really what drive it on the front line. And as I mentioned, it's so important that as an impact investor that we don't take away from the philanthropic space, because what we're seeing in a lot of big family offices and big investors that tend to reallocate their capital towards impact investing or the broader capital markets, and that would be a tragedy if we lose some of those real grassroots philanthropic efforts, which are driven mostly and mainly by young people on the front line living in their communities and understanding the problems that they're trying to solve. So coming back to how young people can get involved, of course, I think just finding a problem and solving it is one of the key things that the world doesn't have enough of. We need problem solvers. We don't need more investors. We actually need people that can identify those issues and come up with tangible solutions to them. And in the context of water, from health and sanitation, it's so important that this is prioritized worldwide.
Well, like talking about also One Young World, I want to share like a very nice initiative that One Young World run during the pandemic. It was called like COVID-19 Young Initiative, where it was like they connect the private sector with grassroots leaders that were like in the front line trying to solve the problems. But we didn't have the resources, the non-resources. So One Young World connect with the private sector, where they gave up the funds to solve the solution. So as COVID-19 was basically a sanitation solution, as Gary said, that's the first advice for everybody: wash your hands. A lot of people cannot wash their hands. So most of the initiative that the young people were solving around the world was giving access to water and sanitation solutions. So things like that, because there were a lot of like hundreds of young leaders on the first line solving their solution. So they embraced the problem at that time. That was an urgent problem to solve. And they like support, together with One Young World, they support the solution that were driving, like wanted to drive, and it make it. So I guess as young people, we are full of like energy, enthusiasm, passion, and like we are all the time like looking for networks, looking for like to potentialize our solutions. So I guess maybe because we are surrounded by young leaders, I think like we are already doing it. But as doing it, we are inspiring also others to join us, like to keep like doing these positive things for the climate.
Thank you very much. I think what we might do now is open it up to the audience for questions. I don't know if anyone has questions in the audience right now. We've got, just raise your hand if you do. Oh, I think we've got.
Can you hear me? Great. So I've been manning the One Young World Instagram account. So we've got a few questions from ambassadors watching live. So timely question. What would you like to see world leaders agree upon at COP26 in relation to water? 21.
Is that for any one of us? Okay. I would like to see them step up and embrace adaptation as much as mitigation. And they're both important. But like I said before, 0.3% of all climate investment is all that is going into water and sanitation for the people who need it the most. So I think that we need to step outside of ourselves to a certain degree. I think we recognize that trying to get carbon and trying to hold at 1.5 is helping all of us. And that's probably why it's attracting most of the money, because it affects, us in the United States or here in Europe. But these issues that we're talking about don't necessarily. And I think we need to level the playing field and get more resources into the adaptation, because it is folly to think at the end that it doesn't affect us because of things like COVID that travels around the world and affects all of us. So let's get on board with more adaptation for the people who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. I just want to add, like, for the governments, like, to be aware, like, for every dollar they will invest in climate adaptation, for example, they would save around $5 for every dollar they invest. So I guess, like, changing that perspective, like, looking at as a financial investment, maybe they will actually come with really clear commitments to adaptations to solve, like, urgently, not in the long term, but also, like, to establish short-term commitments to solve, like, water crisis.
Nothing more novel to add other than I do feel that reverting to the main issue around richer nations being able to finance poorer nations, and the pledge of $100 billion really does center on these types of initiatives, and water being one of them, one of the key projects. So to have that responsibility and being able to take that on their shoulders and fulfilling those commitments, I think, is critical to this conference.
I think we also had one question over here. Did you?
Yes. Hi. Thank you for the interesting talk. It's a bit related to the question that was just asked, but how is COP26 an opportunity for the water crisis, and yeah, that's the question.
It is, and for the first time ever, there's a water pavilion at COP26 where we can bring to the fore how water is climate and how it is, I've heard it said that it's the blade of climate that cuts most deeply is water. And for us to look at that as cutting even more deeply into people who are most vulnerable. So I think that's why we have the Water Pavilion this year, and lots of organizations coming together to highlight water and making it part of the centerpiece of the COP26 negotiation, and ensuring that adequate resources flow to that to fund the infrastructure, to fund the water resource protection, all of the things that impact this. That's what I see happening.
Yeah, well, just to share a data that I found very interesting and very also scary. Water scarcity will display between 24 million to 700 million to 2030. So it's 9 years. So I guess in this COP we don't need to wait until this really more deeper water crisis goes. So I'm expecting to have really, as I said, more short-term commitment, because it is just 9 years. It's we cannot wait until that to have an even bigger problem, because for example in Colombia we already have 30% of the population that doesn't have access to sanitation. So if the crisis goes deeper and worse, how many people will be? So they need to solve this now.
Thank you.
So we've got a question at the back there.
Well, how do you see the perspective between the requirements for sanitation and water with the requirements for the environment and biodiversity, and what's your perspective on that?
Well, I can share some thoughts, because in my organization, that we do is we deliver waterless toilet. So thinking about how to help people and the planet at the same time. So this waterless toilet is very easy to put on the contest where there is no water. So at the same time, this waterless toilet is saving out around 27,000 liters every year for every person that uses it. And so at the same time, you are giving access to sanitation and you're taking care of the environment. It's different maybe from other solutions that you use water to flush and all this. But then you find that how to explain it, to find a balance point where from the top you said, okay, this eco toilet solution will be the best, and then the community said, no, but I want the flush one. So balance those ones, those point of view is not easy. So as we are selling a product, so for those one community that they're already aware that the toilet is not just for the health but also for the environment, it's easy for them to approach and to adapt the solution. For those one that is not, even if they are just next to the river, even when it floods the bathroom, just you can imagine what happened with the bathroom. Even with that, they insist they prefer water toilets, normal toilets. But it's also a change behavior that we need to adapt this new solution for every community. So it's totally related, but it's we need to run away to adopt these solutions here.
Yeah, I think seeing that from the household level up speaks to the question, but I think also, about 80% of sewage in the world is not treated, right? And it's discharged directly into waterways. And talk about, impact on the ecosystems, it's immense. You have, open defecation practiced by, more than 1 billion people. The methane contribution due to that is pretty immense. So when you have wastewater, human waste not being properly treated, it creates all kinds of impacts on the environment and on things like methane. Obviously we're all trying to focus on that here at COP. And so I think these things are so interconnected and they're so reinforcing. You mentioned $5 return on investments in water and sanitation. That doesn't even count the externalities that can come from carbon offsets and things like that, because there's a huge additional return that can come in that way. And I think that as a water sector, we have not been very good about trying to document the carbon that is held within our industry in terms of that, like I mentioned, 8 trillion gallons of water that has a massive carbon footprint. Like nobody is gone to work yet and trying to turn that into what if we fix that, what would be the carbon offset for that, and how do we bring that in? We need to do a better job of that as well.
To add to that point on the fact that everything is interconnected, as you mentioned, and how with open sewage and being unable to even sanitize water, you've got instances in terms of war and conflict zones which has exacerbated that. Take, for example, the recent Gaza war, where more electricity shortages because of the energy shortages in the sanitation plants to be able to purify the water. If you look at Syria as well, there's robust evidence to even show that the civil strife and the unrest came about in 2011 because of the droughts and the shortages and the mass migration of people. Again, in Jordan, you're seeing this. Jordan is when the seas dries up, that will definitely cause all sorts of issues to the Middle East and the surrounding regions. And that whole point around climate migration is exacerbated around water. It's a historical thing. We build civilization around water. We rely on water, and why my first point is why it's such a big public policy issue is that if we don't solve this crisis, then it will, over the next decade and generations to come, we'll keep seeing the civil strife and unrest centered on water, as we have seen over oil and other precious materials.
I think this, so much is about talking, when we see these things happen. And I think that what I really want to drive home is that, it's one thing to have this problem exist, that it does with water and sanitation. It's another to recognize that, okay, there is a lot of money going into it, but it's not nearly enough. And so what do we keep doing? We keep talking about it. But I think now is the time where we actually see the capital markets being able to come into this. And if we have projects like you're talking about, initiatives that you're talking about that are actually bankable, and I'm not talking about concessionary financial returns, I'm talking about real financial returns that, for instance, Water Equity is able to provide to its investors. There's no excuse anymore. If we have impact investors out there willing to put money in and get impact and get a financial return, what's our excuse? And so that's why we created Water Equity, to be able to close this gap. And it does use low-cost debt financing from multilaterals like the Development Finance Corporation, and leverages that with equity so that the equity holders actually get an attractive return on investment. This belongs in anybody's portfolio now. And to have the problem and the capital and not being able to make the connection, that's a crime. That's something that just should not happen. And that's why we went beyond water.org as an NGO and created this asset manager so that we could begin to do that. And now we have visibility on about $1 billion in deals and pipeline that we think that we can match to those investors. And I think we need to recognize that's a way to take action.
I think we've got time for one or two more questions, so we've got one here.
Great, thank you. It's been a really interesting panel. I'm Raf, I work at Brunswick Group, and we advise and work with companies on their net zero strategies, but also their social impact programs and a lot of their communities they operate in. And my question is kind of related to that. What role, how can corporates and large private sector companies fit in this ecosystem? What role can they play here? There's companies like PepsiCo who have 100 million to provide water access to 100 million by 2030. They've been providing water access to 25 million. So we're seeing a few examples, but how can corporates fit into this ecosystem with investors, with philanthropy, etc., and play a meaningful role to support a lot of other players with their initiatives?
Well, I can share, like, actually the way we have like two business models. One of the business models is like B2B2C, where we offer our value to a company as like a big corporation, where we get the first investment to build the first toilet, for example. Then the families are paying back in installments in maximum like 3 years. The point is like really different from what we don't return the money for the corporation, but we invest again that toilet that in 2 years that we have the money back, again we start a new toilet. So it's like we receive like this first investment and we make it like run for many years, like invest in any one more time in different toilets, for example. That's the way we are doing it.
There's also something that we're part of and help get started is the Water Resilience Coalition, which is a collection, I believe, almost 30 corporations, global corporations that are committing to water resilience, but also committing to reaching real people with access to water and sanitation. And we have, in fact, PepsiCo has been a big supporter of us and investors in our funds. Some of our corporate partners have actually invested in the funds to be able to do this. So it is looking at the corporate partners where you have aligned interest. They know that water resources are limited. They know that they have to have that social license to operate around the world. And so by partnering with us and other NGOs, they're able to get access to water for people, but also to protect the watersheds and look at water resource management. And so, Anheuser-Busch InBev, Stella Artois is a big supporter of this as well with their sustainability. So you see, the level of chief sustainability officer in corporations being elevated more and more. And I think that's where we see the partnerships happening that can serve the long-term needs of everyone in the water basins.
Fantastic. I think we've one very small question, and then we'll...
Thank you so much. Hopefully this is a quick question, but I noticed that earlier you were saying that water.org impacts 87%, or like the people that you're impacting is 7% women. And my question is, how important is equality between the sexes in solving our water crisis? And what's the tie-in between providing them with water, technology, and education? Because as you guys are saying, everything's interconnected. And so I don't know if that's a simple question or not, but.
A good question to end with, I think. Go for it.
Well, I guess you addressed it to me because I made the quote. Yes, so water is a women's issue. I mean, if you look at who's responsible for collecting water, who's responsible for, the girls and the women are the ones, the girls are out of school, the women aren't working because they're trying to secure water. And so we know that, when you put more money in the hands of women, nothing bad ever happened, right? And what we're talking about is putting more money in the hands of women so that they can get the water solutions that they need for their family. They're the ones who, not dissing the men too much, but they're the ones that tend to put the family first in terms of their health and their needs. And I think that's why not only do they suffer the most from it, but they see the most potential to help their families. In terms of technology and education, that is what we do with our local finance partners around the world. So we, Water.org, don't go out and do this. We work through those local financial partners who work with the households to fully understand the value that water can create for them and access to sanitation. And then they work with the women to market these loans to them. And it can be whatever the women choose, the technology that they choose, the type of toilet that we were talking about, the type of water solution. So it's putting money in the hands of women, and it's also putting the market at their disposal to get what they think is best for them and their family.
Any final comments from any of the panelists on that last question?
Just on that last question, and especially on the point on technology and women, female-led startup companies and those health tech solutions that we've seen as investors are particularly powerful in terms of being able to, again, identify that problem and understanding how best to solve those issues, and trying to get the right capital to those female founders on the ground, being able to create those robust pipelines, knowing which partners to work with and organizations, institutions to develop that talent is critical. And again, there's a few more impactful ways than investing in small, medium enterprises, social enterprises, and startups to solve those issues. So as an investor, I guess I'm always looking for the next big thing and the next female founder to back. So that's what we're all about.
Yeah, well, just to add, I just remember, like, when we start with delivering access to sanitation in a family where there is the mom, the dad, and everything, then we realized that the ones that really were using the toilet were the women and the girls. So, but what we found is, like, the women say, okay, yes, I want the toilet, but most of the time they cannot pay the toilet because they don't work. So they have to convince, like, their husbands to actually to buy the toilet. But sometimes that really change, like, their minds, because they say, okay, I want the toilet, maybe for my husband it's not a priority. So they start working to pay the toilet. So, like, also prioritizing, not just because they can really, like, pay back, because they are the ones who are most suffer of the lack of sanitation, and they are, like, willing to pay and to have access by their own efforts. So we realized that, and now, like, all our solutions prioritize women, for example, and they are really, like, I have a lot of really, like, changing life stories just because they have access to a toilet that they can feel, like, comfortable, dignity, and well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for such an interesting session. Gary, Jennifer, Fahim, thank goodness that you were here to talk to us about water today. And thank you so much for the audience for your brilliant questions as well. That's all we've got time for. But yeah, we'll see you after the networking break for another session.